Hey everybody, today I'm taking a look at Mosaic, a story of civilization. This is a 2 to 6 player Civ game designed by Glenn Drover. This one takes around 2 hours to play on average. Before I get started on my review of Mosaic, I want to give a shout out to the show sponsor KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer when it comes to purchasing board games here in the UK. And if you use my link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Okay, so I've just finished a 2-player game here. So this is what the game state is going to look like towards the end of a game. So I'll just give you a quick tour of the play area and then we'll get into some thoughts. So you can see here on the main board, we have the map of kind of Europe and the surrounding areas here. Now some areas are going to be closed off depending on the player count. So for example, in a 2-player game, both these 2 areas are not in play. And during the setup, you're going to have a bunch of these tokens randomly distributed on the board. So these are going to be these different trade goods which can relate to other actions in the game. You also have these tokens which will actually increase your production of certain things. Like for example, this token would give you +2 food production as well as giving you a unique trade token. You also have these kind of cachet tokens here which will reveal when you end up building on them, and they'll give you an instant bonus. Like in this example, it will give you 15 money. Now, as the game goes on, you will be purchasing all these different cards, and I have to say that this game does a fantastic job of you being able to look at the game at a glance and see what all your available options are. So despite this one being quite an involved game, the actual breakdown of the actions you can take and what you can do is pretty straightforward. So in the top left-hand side of the board here, we have the buildings that you can build. So you have 3 different types of buildings. You have the cities, which can come in either the ports form or just a normal form. You've got towns, and you also have these projects. Now the projects will generally act as a scoring mechanism. So you can see here that for this hospital, I'd get 1 victory point for every one of these symbols that I collected throughout the game at the end of the game. You have these population cards here, which will increase your population by cashing in food. Now your population will make you much more productive when it comes to producing goods such as stone, food, or ideas. Now ideas allow you to buy technologies, which will increase your engine and your ability to do things. And there's a ton of variation on what these can do. Like for example, the agriculture one here will just increase your food production. One that will increase your tax production. You climb all these different tracks you can do, but there are a ton of different ones as well. Like for example, ones I've collected here, like this armor card, which means that my military units cannot be eliminated. So there is a lot of different things rather than just increasing your production to do things. At the bottom of the board here, you have the tax and tariff cards, which will allow you to get more money basically. However, they will come with some unrest, which will give you kind of negative points if you don't counteract that by doing other things. And whenever you build either a town or a city or a port city, you'll end up putting these kind of taxes in this holding area, which means when somebody else does use the tax or tariff action, you will end up acquiring all of the money that's built up in that area as the game has progressed. And some alternative actions are to build military units, which will kind of add towards a bit of a area majority thing when it comes to the different regions. When you buy those units, you are going to end up spending 5 for each unit you purchase, and you'll put them on the different areas. Like for example, you can see here in this kind of Italy area, I've invested in these military units. My opponent has done these ones here. And you can actually end up spending money to move them from border to border as well. And you can invest in these new governments, which will give you kind of permanent powers or different kind of rule breaking things you can do. And they will generally cost you ideas and prerequisites of having the different symbols. And there's also a couple of different things which I didn't mention, such as the wonders. So the wonders are quite expensive because they end up costing you, or start off costing you 20 stone and 5 food. And for each additional one you build after that, each one of those different categories increases by 5. But those wonders are really useful, and you can see here that throughout the game you've ended up building quite a few of these. Me personally ended up building quite a lot of these. They'll do lots of different things, such as giving you like pure victory points if you end up buying this pyramid, and different end game scoring criteria. Like this one says, for the Sphinx, I get 4 victory points for each wonder in that region. The Great Library, which says I get 5 victory points +2 for every identical pillar symbols of your choice. And those pillar symbols are these ones at the bottom of the cards here. So not only do they synergize with a bunch of kind of different scoring cards, like for example, the ones I've collected here will say I get 1 victory point for each of these hammer symbols. But they will also be prerequisites for other cards. So you can see here, in order for me to build this plumbing card, I would have needed a book symbol and one of these hammer symbols. Let's look a bit further into my personal player area. So this is my personal player board, which will track my production of all the different things I can do. So you're going to start with the bare minimum here, but your starting card is going to change that. Like in this game, I had the farmer card, which makes me a bit more productive when it comes to making food. And it gives me a unique player power. Like for example, this one says that when I buy a population card, I get one additional population, which is very useful because again, they increase your production and they'll also allow you to, well, when you end up building cities, you actually have to end up spending population, which will obviously decrease your production going forward, but will increase your presence on the map. So yeah, you got your stone production, you got your food production, you got your ideas production. You also have your tax and tariffs. This area here will store all your unique goods, which again can be important. And you can see here that as the game goes on, you can end up acquiring quite a few cards. So this certainly is quite a sprawling game. These are all your additional resources, such as your stone, your ideas, and your food here. And additionally, you can see these different things that I've collected throughout the game, which are these kind of race objectives, these civilization achievements, which says, if you are the first player to achieve 15 food production, you'll get 6 victory points. Or if the first person to get 6 military units gets 6 victory points, etc. And there are quite a few of those as well. And there are also these golden age cards, which are another way to get victory points, which will mean that you are racing to get to certain symbols. So in this example, I was the first person to get these 6 of these symbols, which will give me more victory points and give you an instant bonus, such as get you, additional population, more production, free cities, etc. Now, one of the big ways to get points in the game is to try and control these regions, and your influence in these regions is going to depend on a number of things. The first of which is your military units in those regions. Like, you'll count 1 influence for each military unit you have. But you'll also get influence based on the cities you've built in that region and the towns you've built in that region. Now, cities can generally spawn anywhere, but towns have to go off of where you have a city. And when you build them and you end up building on top of these tokens, you'll acquire those tokens. So when those scoring trigger, which will happen when these civil empire scoring cards are revealed in each of these decks. So in each of the different decks here, the buildings, the technologies, the population, and the tax and tariff deck. Once these cards are revealed, the game will stop and then you'll do a quick scoring and calculating the influence in each of those regions. The player with the most influence will score 3 points plus a point for every city and wonder in that region. And then any runner-up will get 2 points. So again, there is quite a bit of fierce competition here, and there will be additional cards and things which can increase your ability to harvest points through that area control part of the game. Now, these Empire scoring cards will also act as one of the end game triggers, because as soon as the third one is revealed, that's going to basically be the end of the game, and you'll end up going into the end game scoring. But an alternative way the game can end is when 2 out of 3 of the different tile types are going to be gobbled up by the other players, and that will include the wonders, the golden age tiles here, or the public objectives. These are civilization achievements. So, of course, I have only scratched the surface with the game with that quick overview there, because there are a ton of things going on here. This has the full feeling of a Civ game because there are so many cards and so many different things you can do. But I want to go back to that fact that this game is so digestible because all the independent actions are really easily resolved and easy to see what you can do at any time. And I think that is a true triumph, that how streamlined and digestible this game is, because you can actually teach this game ultra quickly. You have one of 8 actions you can do on your turn, and they're all super simple. Are you going to produce your stone food or ideas? Are you going to buy one of those population cards? Are you going to build a building? Are you going to build a wonder? Are you going to get a new technology by spending those ideas? Are you going to tax or tariff your the population? Are you going to buy military units, or are you going to take a new government? And even some of those options aren't used very often, so that you're generally going to be kind of buying technologies. You're generally going to be buying new cities and things. So a couple of these actions are the ones you're going to mainly use. And I love it when games manage to truly streamline and cut back on anything that doesn't need to be there. There is pretty much no rules minutiae or kind of fiddly rules exceptions in this game, which is something I really look for in gaming nowadays, because this is kind of one of those games where, again, despite getting that full Civ feeling, You can kind of maybe even go for a year without playing this one and remember all the rules, because again, everything is in front of you. And civilization games are something I've always wanted to find my one, I suppose. But they always tend to skew a little bit too heavy for me, as in they are ultra complex, get tons of rules, exceptions and fiddliness, etc. Or they are a bit too stripped back and a bit too almost abstract to the point where it doesn't really feel like a Civ game. So yeah, this one actually is a really nice balance between the two, where again you get that full feel, but still very simple to play, and definitely well developed and well ironed out. One of this game's biggest strengths for sure is how quickly these actions are resolved, because no matter what you choose, before you know it, it is your turn again. And considering the magnitude of this game, I think that is a real triumph, because normally games of this weight or this caliber will mean that you just have to accept a certain degree of AP, or just waiting for other people to make the decisions on what they want to do and resolve their actions in the first place. This one just does away with that, which is quite remarkable. And I think one of the biggest things about it is how good the forward momentum of this game is, because you are constantly increasing your production. And if you take one of those production actions, especially towards the middle or end of the game, you are completely showered in resources, meaning that the world is your oyster, really. You can do what you want to do, and you don't have to spend all that time grinding towards making a big move. If you already have your mind set on building one of the wonders, which are generally quite expensive, you're not having to wait, 6, 7, 8 turns before you can achieve what you want to. You can do a couple of production actions and then probably do what you want to do. Meaning that one of the kind of economies in this game is the action economy and not the resources themselves, because every action you take is important, which is just a really cool thing about this game. It's just how quick and snappy everything is resolved. I truly love how this game doesn't have any rounds or phases to think about. You really do just keep taking actions until one of those endgame triggers has happened. And that means the flow of the game is fantastic. You really do get immersed, and you don't have to kind of have those tedious procedural moments. So yeah, I really love the way that works. Yes, you do have to stop every now and then, only 3 times in the game to do one of those empire scorings, but that's a pivotal part of it, and again, very easy to resolve. And before you know it, you are back taking your actions. I also love how there are tons of ways to get points here. Are you going to really gun for the Golden Age achievements, the Civilization achievements? Are you going to build loads of wonders? Are you going to focus on those area control points there? Are you going to build tons of cities because you are rewarded for doing that? Are you going to try and tailor towards the different technologies that will score you points, or the projects? Are you going to try and build these farm towns which will give you points based on the trade goods you have? So I love the kind of multiple paths to victory here, and everything seems balanced to me. We had a game of this last night and we went very different paths, did different things, and I think there was about a point in it by the end of the game. So yeah, I love the way that you really do have a buffet of options at all times, and all of them are viable and inviting. Let's quickly touch on the production of the game here. So this is the retail version of the game. There is a deluxe Kickstarter one which comes with miniatures, etc. I've not seen or played that one, so I cannot testify with how good that one is. This one itself, though, is very nicely produced. I think everything is very clearly laid out. The actual symbology on the cards and the artwork is lovely. And yeah, generally I'm happy with the way that you very seldom need to refer to the rulebook to find anything, because it's also clearly labelled on the cards. Now, despite me generally being happy with the production, there were a few issues we had. Number one, there is no scoreboard with the game, which was quite a surprise to us, because there is in-game scoring as well as end-game scoring. So you're going to have to write it down on a bit of paper or on an app or something, which was quite surprising. Additionally, you can see here that you can end up acquiring loads of cards, which makes it quite difficult to monitor how many of each symbol that you have, which can be important when it comes to things such as the the Golden Age achievement. So it would be nice if there was a way that these cards could line up where you could see all the different symbols you have, which is kind of a missed opportunity for me. A very small nitpick as well is that sometimes when calculating the regions, it would be nice if you can just quickly glance and see how much influence each player has, because it does become a bit, mathematic and a bit procedural, but counting all the different pips and values and influence of all the different wonders, towns and cities and military units, etc. Another thing that I'm not enthused about is the variable game length, because during this setup, these Empire scoring cards are semi-randomly shuffled into these decks, or at least the bottom end of these decks. It means that sometimes those cards are going to be right at the bottom, sometimes they're going to be towards the top of the bottom, which can massively change how long the game takes, maybe up to like 30 minutes or so. So yeah, it would have been nice to have a bit more consistency and a bit more predictability about when the game is going to end, rather than being completely subject to randomness, I suppose. Now, of course, there is that second endgame trigger as well, which is when the tiles get taken. But even then, sometimes there might be tiles here which nobody is really gunning for, which again might slow the game down, especially if they're both coming into play. Are there going to be tiles that people don't want, as well as the cards being in the bottom end of those decks? So yeah, I think maybe as a house rule going forward, I might kind of maybe take a few cards out or something, just to guarantee the game is going to be a bit quicker. Now, I don't want that to sound overly negative, because there is a lot of game here, and generally games of this magnitude take longer than 1.5 to 2 hours. And just touching on that point a little bit more, during this last game that we had, because those cards were towards the bottom of so many of the decks, it meant that I was kind of in this no man's land area for quite some time. I thought I was in a strong position and was ready for the game to end. However, I could not find a way to do it. So I just ended up kind of purchasing cards just for the sake of it, and just to kind of, just farming cards that I knew would give me an extra point or two, where it would have been nice if, the game would end when you still have a bit of purpose and still have some direction, rather than just floundering. There is a fair amount of player interaction in this game. We've already talked about the area majority part of it, and there are some military cards in this deck which can actively hurt other players, but bearing in mind this is simple area majority and it's not destructive to the point where, it's so take that-ish, if that makes sense. There is a massive urgency to get the cards that you want, because if there's a great card up there, you want to be beating your opponent to the punch and grabbing it, which is of course is the case with a lot of drafting games. And I also do like that race to get to the, the different wonders, the different achievements, etc. So again, there is a sense of urgency that goes on throughout the entire game. Okay, so let's share some final thoughts on Mosaic. And I have to say, I am quite impressed, especially when it comes to how finely engineered the game is. Everything in excess has been removed without sacrificing any of that Civ feeling. This is definitely a sweet spot when it comes to what I'm looking for with this type of game. I love how you can play the game without the game playing you. You can read the rules once and you're pretty much set for life, because there are little, if not no, rules exceptions or any fiddliness or any kind of minutia that you need to remember. It is all on the board in front of you at a glance. The actual board itself has been so well designed, where you've got all the costs and things on the board here. You can monitor everything on your player board, etc. So yeah, I love that you can pull this one off the shelf after a long break and still know exactly what you're doing without having to relearn it each time, which is exactly what I'm looking for. I'm really excited to see the different things you can find here, because you have a ton of these technology cards. You're not going to get through them all in one game. Yeah, so there's just a ton of options at all times. The action economy is fantastic. How am I going to be most efficient and not waste any turns here? Because everything is in such high demand. They're the best technologies, the best buildings. The population is scarce. The racing to get to the objectives and the wonders you want. Everything is fierce competition without feeling too nasty either. Even the level of area control, while it's an important part of the game, it's not the be all and end all of the game. And you can choose to kind of forsake a part of this if you want to and focus on other things, which is always great. Have a buffet of options and tons of different paths to victory. So yeah, at the moment, I really don't have much negative to say, apart from those few little issues when it comes to managing all your symbols and things, because you do end up acquiring a ton of cards, especially if the game goes on a little bit too long. But other than that, I think the game is so well designed, and I can certainly see why it's got some buzz. And I think this one is going to actually have some legs, because again, those games that are or don't have much bloat, that are pretty straightforward but still have that depth, those are the ones that stand the test of time. And I think that fans of Mosaic will still be saying the same thing in several years' time. So this one is definitely going to get a commendation for me, and I think it might even be onwards and upwards for Mosaic.